All right, hello everyone. My name is Sarah Groh. I'm really excited to be here and share the work that I actually started as an undergraduate with Celeste. So individuals with concealable rather than apparent stigmas must decide when and to whom they're going to disclose that stigma. And many literatures recognize the importance of historical and interpersonal context for impacting these disclosure decisions. However, no theory exists that can offer a unifying account. Thus, we turn to affect control theory and interact. Heise's work has shown how affect control theory can predict likely behaviors, and we elaborate this premise by developing an extension that we're calling the effective probability of disclosure that predicts the probability of disclosure decisions for individuals with concealable stigma across historical and interpersonal contexts. For this study, we look at the disclosure of same-sex attraction as being a member of the queer community is a concealable stigma with a high prevalence in the US. We find that the likelihood of disclosure is contingent upon anticipated reactions. Thus, the closer the squared Euclidean distance between the predicted behaviors for family member actors towards child identities and then again towards stigmatized child identities, the greater the likelihood of that disclosure. Essentially, what we're doing is we're capturing the anticipation of being treated differently between being out or not, which impacts disclosure decisions. So for example, a lesbian daughter who anticipates that her mom is going to treat her like a mom should treat a daughter is going to be more likely to disclose. Thus, we ask, how are these structural behaviors that influence anticipated reactions impacted by historical and interpersonal context? Prior work on identity maintenance within affect control theory has thus far used fundamental sentiments to predict behavior based on the degree of affinity between identities. Closer identities are in semantic space, the more similar they are, and thus the greater likelihood that individuals are going to want to adopt or invoke those identities. We elaborate this premise. In essence, what we're doing is we're asking how people weigh the answer to the question, how differently is this person going to treat me after my disclosure? Thus, we simulate events using this equation. So prior work has operationalized the degree of affinity between identities using this equation, and we extend this equation to another situation to predict the likely behaviors between a stigmatized and a non-stigmatized identity. Likely behaviors that are closer together in semantic space are more similar and thus indicates a greater likelihood of disclosure. So first, we simulated events using interact to look at interpersonal context. To do so, we used the 2015 UGA dictionary. We simulated the predicted behaviors for family member identities towards child identities, and child identities were identities like daughter, son, child, but also lesbian daughter, gay son, and bisexual child, among others. We added modifiers to the family member identities to include variability in the types of family members. We then used the equation to calculate the effective likelihood of disclosure by calculating the Euclidean distance between the behaviors directed towards stigmatized and non-stigmatized identities. On the left side, we can see the results. So disclosure, the differences for disclosure to siblings over parents are significantly smaller, which shows that they're closer together. These likely behaviors are closer together in semantic space, meaning they're more similar, which indicates that LGBT individuals are more likely to disclose to siblings over parents, which is consistent with results in prior literature. Next, we looked at one specific group within the queer community, lesbian women, to examine the interplay between historical and interpersonal context. On the right, we can see the results here. So disclosure to siblings before parents is a relatively new phenomenon, as starting in 2002 to 4, the sibling-related identities begin to break away from the parent-related identities, which shows how historical context can modify interpersonal context. Thus, we developed an extension to affect control theory, the effective probability of disclosure, that accounts for the role of structural behaviors in informing anticipated reactions across contexts. We find that simulations that use the effective probability of disclosure reflect results in prior literature, which illustrates how affect control theory may be extended to account for situations where individuals are weighing disclosure decisions for concealable stigma. The new directions in this then are to examine what other kinds of concealable stigma this might apply for, and we're doing just that. We're now looking at disclosure of a mental illness diagnosis to healthcare providers. Thank you.